Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. Another edition of Canada's most irreverent talk show here, the Andrew Lawton Show on True North on this Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024. I always give the year just in case you've been in a prolonged coma. You went into it in 2015 perhaps, and I have to tell you, Justin Trudeau is still the Prime Minister. No, don't go back into the coma. I think it's going to get better as well. If you look at the polling numbers anyway, Canadians are eager for a change. Now, obviously, when push comes to shove, the Liberals thought that their big, giant, big spending, capital gains increasing budget was going to move the needle on their polls. But new numbers that came out, don't know if it was yesterday or this morning, showed that even with all that spending and all of that tax the rich stuff, 40% of those who reacted said 2 thumbs down, 43% didn't give a hoot, and only 17% were keen on what the Liberal government was doing. So that is not exactly the turning around of the numbers that the Liberal government thought it would be getting. So very good news if you're Pierre Poilievre, less so if you're Jagmeet Singh, because you're still keeping that Liberal government afloat. And I think voters may, in fact, not take too kindly to that in the next election. But I don't want to talk about polling and horse racing. We've still got, how long do we have now? We're in April. The next election's probably going to be September, October. We've still got a year and a half left. And so I don't want to just spend every day like, this up 2 points and down 1 point and all of that. But every now and then you have to pop in and look at the bigger picture trends there. I do want to talk about some things that never change. And one of those is government incompetence, which if you've heard this show in the past and you've heard me talk about the Liberal government's attempted gun buyback, you'll know that this is one of the rare situations in which I am delighted that the Liberal government is as incompetent as it is. So let's go back in time here. It was May 1st, 2020. So almost 4 years to the day ago that the Liberal government announced this order in council, this sweeping prohibition on about 1,500 types of firearms. It was written on the back of a napkin in the wake of the horrific spree killing in it was around different parts, but the epicenter of it was Portapique, Nova Scotia. And the Liberal government knew that at that moment in time, Canadians were just so horrified by what had happened that they would swallow any gun control measure the Liberals put forward. Didn't matter if it had nothing to do with the criminal acts themselves. The Liberals knew that they could just point to this guy, point to this incident, then point to a gun ban, and it would be very difficult for Canadians to defend firearms in that moment. And indeed, Aaron O'Toole was the leader, so it was difficult for Conservatives to defend anything. But what had happened there, which was quite interesting, is that the Liberals, which had been promising this, they had been promising this for quite some time, just shoved this out the door and gave no thought to implementation or rollout. Originally, when they announced this order in council, they thought it was going to be wrapped up and done by May 1st, 2022. Well, I shudder to tell you that it is not 2022. It is not 2023. It is almost May 1st, 2024. Not a single firearm has been bought back. Now, obviously, you need to take into consideration here that the buyback is in and of itself a branding exercise. This is a massive nationwide firearms confiscation. But nevertheless, the firearms buyback, confiscation, whatever you want to call it, has racked up tens of millions of dollars in costs, well over 40 million, without acquiring a single firearm. And shockingly, the government doesn't even have a way of getting these guns. Now, call it schadenfreude. I find this to be absolutely hilarious. So let's start with Alberta and Saskatchewan. These are two provinces that have put up serious roadblocks between the federal government and its gun-grabbing desires. The Alberta government has decided it's going to license anyone who wants to function in the province of Alberta in a capacity of collecting firearms. And that means that if a federal police officer wants to come in and start collecting guns, they will need to have a provincial license. And what if the provincial government is very, very stingy with those licenses? What if they just don't want to give out any of those licenses. That is what former Justice Minister Tyler Shandro indicated would be the government's approach. Saskatchewan has done something very similar. We had a couple of weeks back the new chief firearms officer of Saskatchewan and the new, I forget his name, a firearms commissioner. Bob Freeberg was his name, who was the previous chief firearms officer. And Saskatchewan not interested in participating in this federal gun grab. So here you have two provinces, which I think per capita have more gun owners in them than anywhere else in the country, that are saying they're not going to go along with this. Alberta has also, by the way, said it will not allow police resources in the province to be used for this gun confiscation. Manitoba has been a little iffy on this, not under the NDP government. They're probably going to roll, but the previous PC government was fairly critical. In the territories, they've been fairly critical. But then we have this reporting that came out of Radio-Canada CBC, where the federal government thought that Canada Post could be a partner on this. They thought, because Canada Post has experience shipping guns. When I ordered a handgun from one vendor, it was Canada Post that brought it to my door. And Canada Post, they thought, okay, let's just send everyone a self-addressed stamped envelope. They can put their gun in it and hand it to the mailman, and the mailman will bring it back to Ottawa. I mean, not exactly. You know what I mean. That's what the government thought. Well. Canada Post isn't having any of it. They're saying, well, hang on. Why is this our employees' problem? They've sent a letter to the federal government. I love this, saying, no, that we don't want to do this. We don't want to send our postal carriers to your angry gun owners' houses, the gun owners that you've teed off with this gun grab, and demand that they hand over their guns to your friendly neighborhood mailman. I have a lovely mailman. I wouldn't yell at him, but I have no interest in giving him my legally owned, legally purchased firearms to send back to Justin Trudeau. So you have here now Canada Post, which was the government's fallback plan, saying we don't want any part of this. So who is left? I mean, I have to wonder, of the tens of millions of dollars that the Liberals have spent on this, where has it gone if they don't even have anyone that's willing to assist in this so-called gun buyback? Remember, they partnered up with the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammo Association. We had the president of the CSAAA, Wes Winkle, on the show a couple of weeks back. Very similar thing. They were trying to help the government with just getting inventory out of businesses. They hadn't even gotten to the consumer stuff. And even on the business side of things, they're not optimistic that there's a roadmap in place. And one of the points that Wes Winkle raised on the show here is that the federal government just doesn't even know anything about this space that it's decided to enter. They don't know about the types of guns. They don't know the difference between a shotgun and a pistol. They don't know any of this stuff. And they're now trying to come in and pretend to be the experts to oversee this massive, massive program, the cost of which are likely to balloon up to $1 billion if this goes ahead. So all of this is to say, I am not telling the government to get its act together. I actually am completely fine with the government spinning its tires and being so utterly inept and incompetent that it can't actually do what it's setting out to do. But my goodness, this is an absolutely hilarious development where, the government's first expected the provinces to do their job. And then the provinces said, well, this isn't our job. We aren't interested in doing this. And then the federal government said, okay, Canada Post is going to. Canada Post will do it. And now Canada Post is saying that it's not going to do this as well. So again, at a certain point, I don't even know what they have left. Because you may recall, I believe it was David Lametti, the former justice minister, who, when the provinces were initially saying what Alberta and Saskatchewan were saying, which was that we're not going to let police resources be used, we're going to license them, the federal government really didn't have any tool in its arsenal to respond to that except for finger wagging. They basically said, you're getting in the way of what we're doing. And I think it was, Danielle Smith that said, well, yeah, that's kind of the point, Minister. That's we don't want you to be doing what you're doing, and we don't want you to be doing it in our province. I would love a whole country of people doing that. I would love to see Premier Doug Ford in Ontario. I can't remember if Blaine Higgs went down that road as well in New Brunswick. I seem to recall there was at least some resistance to what the federal government was trying to do. But I can't recall if they had gone as far as Alberta and Saskatchewan had. But I wanted to read a quote from this letter that the Canada Post folks sent to the federal government here. They said that, I just got to find it here. Oh, here it is. That employee safety is the concern. They actually don't believe that it's safe for their employees. Now, the federal government has said that it would be the most efficient and least costly way of doing it. So they think that Canada, because now they care about cost savings and efficiency in Ottawa inexplicably, but they think Canada Post is going to be that. The Canada Post folks are saying, yeah, we're actually refusing to do this. Now, here's the one quote I wanted to share with you from the article. Federal officials told Radio Canada, that's the, I just read that line. My screen is bouncing all over the place here. They're saying it's going to delay. It's a challenge, but we don't think this jeopardizes our timetable or the government's desire to move forward. We want the discussions to continue. So the government's latest timeline on this is October of 2025, conveniently when the next election is scheduled for. So we're now talking about a year and a half from now, and the government is still in the discussion phase. So the idea that they are going to discuss, reach a conclusion, find a plan, implement that plan, and finish it, collect the millions of guns across the country that fall under this prohibition. And they're going to do this all in a year and a half. If you believe that, I have some oceanfront property in Saskatchewan for you. This is not going to work at all. Now, I suspect what the Liberals want is they want to just delay until like right at the election time. And then all of a sudden, the big, scary, meanie conservative Pierre Poilievre is going to have to get out there in front of journalists and Canadians and defend the right of Canadians to keep their AR-15s, a gun that is vastly misunderstood by people, which is why it became the subject of the Liberal government's ire in the first place. But they want to make this an election issue in the same way they did in 2021, and I believe 2019, but more so in 2021 with Aaron O'Toole. But the reason it was so effective on Aaron O'Toole is because he completely rolled on his platform. He had his pledge literally printed and laminated and bound in his platform. And then he got a couple of questions from reporters he didn't like. And all of a sudden he just reversed it. And they released an updated version with some asterisk where they effectively said they weren't going to change what the Liberals had done. And when your commitment in an election is that you're going to let what the other guys did stand, you're telling Canadians that you are not providing any contrast. You're telling Canadians that you're not actually a different option. You're not actually an alternative. So that's why it is so important to not try to compete on the other side's turf. If you are, in fact, running on a different platform, own that platform, defend it. And let's be real, Canadians don't understand guns if they haven't been around them. A lot of Canadians just do not get it. The way you counter that is through education. It's one of the reasons I made Assaulted, which was a firearms documentary I am incredibly proud of. It's one of the reasons that I also have continued to talk about this issue on my show. I know there are a lot of people that listen that are gun owners that love it, that whenever we do a segment on guns, it's always shared on the gun groups on Facebook, and I love hearing from those people. There are also folks that are like, yeah, I'm a conservative on every other issue, but I don't get on this one. But even a lot of those people are starting to understand the importance of firearms policy just from a property rights perspective. Like, do you want the government coming and saying that this thing that you bought legally, that you played by the rules on, is now the government's property? And I was chatting with someone who's a gun owner in Toronto, so, heaven help him. But he was telling me when we were chatting about this, and I thought it was an interesting point. If the government hasn't even thought of the transport aspect, if the government hasn't even thought of how they're going to transport all these firearms, have they thought about how they're going to store them? Because remember, all of these guns that get turned in are going to get melted down. It's going to be a very depressing day if you love guns when these, antique guns, these collectible guns, these fascinating guns, these things that are used for sport shooting that have never hurt anyone are just, smelted down and put into this big heap of metal in Ottawa. But what are they going to do when they're storing it? What's the repository going to look like? Like, we just passed the anniversary of, I forget how much it was, but it was like millions of dollars of gold that was stolen from a secure warehouse at Pearson Airport. Now, if we can't protect millions of dollars in gold from being stolen by, based on the charges, not, just a random group of guys, how are we going to protect thousands of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of firearms that are all sitting in a warehouse just waiting to be smelted? Keeping in mind, we know how inefficient and ineffective government is on this. So I absolutely Absolutely do not believe that this is going to happen. I think there is probably going to be a significant about face when there is an election coming around. And look, every time I talk about, Pierre Poilievre as being the most likely elected in the next election, you get people saying, "Oh, what about Maxime Bernier? What about Yves Francois Blanchet?" No one's actually said what about Blanchet, but I'm going with what the poll numbers are now, and the poll numbers are showing that Canadians are ripe for change. If they perhaps change from there and you see someone else poised for victory, I'll amend my commentary. But for all intents and purposes, we are looking towards a conservative government in 2025. And that is one that has, at this point, been pretty unequivocal about wanting to roll back all of these liberal government proclamations, edicts, the Order in Council, the firearms laws, all of that. So that is exactly where we are on this now. And I think it's an important one, because if government is going after your property on something like firearms, it's only a matter of time before they go after your property for some other reason that they think is necessary, that they think is a public safety requirement, and you don't. And that is, I think, so crucial here. So it isn't just a gun issue. It is a property rights issue. And that, I think, is an important angle on this. Now, I wanted to revisit a discussion we had on the show yesterday about plastics. You may have seen there's this big, giant plastic confab that the United Nations is hosting in Ottawa right now. So the Canadian government is the host nation as the world delegates decide they want to create a plastics treaty. Now, even the Secretary General or Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, he was tweeting today about the need for a plastics treaty as a public health issue. He says we need a plastic treaty to protect the health of people and the planet, to which I replied somewhat glibly on Twitter, 2 weeks to flatten the Tupperware. That is my response to that. When the guys who brought you the global COVID response are leading the plastic response, it will not be good in the least. That was from Dr. Tedros there. We also had Greenpeace roll out the red carpet and welcome delegates there. This was them, I believe that's the Shaw Centre in Ottawa. Welcome delegates, don't trash the treaty. Welcome to Ottawa for Inc. 4 unless you are with big oil and plastic. So if you're with big oil and big plastic, they are not welcoming you. But if you are from if you're not from one of those industries, they welcome you to Ottawa. By the way, Greenpeace, I assume, has to travel to these conferences, and I presume they don't swim and walk. So take from that what you will, but I think there's a bit of little tiny bit of hypocrisy. Oh, Sean's done the research on this. Her bio says she's from North Carolina. So, okay, she didn't need to swim. She could have walked. I don't think she walked from North Carolina. I don't even Greyhound doesn't even like run in Canada anymore, I don't think. So she had to get to Ottawa somehow, and she might have burned some fossil fuels to get to Ottawa. He says he has a screen. What do you have? I don't know what do you have a screen grab of? Oh, there we go. Sean was just telling me you had a screen grab. Yeah. I really hate plastic and get to do fun things with Greenpeace. Imagine that being your epitaph. I really hate plastic. Like, the one line of real estate that you get to define yourself to the world is I really hate plastic. William Shatner, I saw, wrote an op-ed in the Globe and Mail the other day calling for a global plastics treaty. Look, I like William Shatner, but I think if we restrict plastics too much, his face might not look the way it looks to this day. So, was that a low blow? No, no. William Shatner actually picked a fight with me on Twitter once, so I think I'm allowed. Okay, what happened was I had requested an interview with him because I had his email address, and I had emailed him, which for something unrelated, and I had emailed him for an interview because I thought this is I like William Shatner. He's a Canadian legend. I had interviewed him once on my radio show years ago, and instead of responding to the email, he looked me up on Twitter and issued like a public rejection of my request, and then told me I had to go through proper channels next time I wanted to speak to him. So that was the last I spoke to William Shatner. Anyway, I just had my comeuppance, I suppose. So this is what is happening there. We've got the WHO pushing this. We've got Greenpeace pushing this. And you've got Stephen Guilbeault pushing it. I shared the clip yesterday of him talking about the need to have a global plastics treaty. And we're going to be revisiting this over the course of the week here, because you have to be very concerned at what happens at these sessions, because it always tends to trickle down to domestic policy. And this is the part that people fail to realize, is that they'll all say, oh, this treaty is non-binding, it's symbolic, we're just doing this, we're trying to all get on the same page. But at a certain point, it all trickles down to what we do here. And remember, this is a federal government in Canada that tried to and succeeded in banning single-use plastics. They did it by declaring plastics a toxin, believe it or not. And then it was only when it went to court that the judge ruled, like, you can't call plastics a toxin. You actually can't put plastic in this category. So the federal government has tried to redefine this to push a very, they couch it as an environmental agenda, but really it is an anti-energy agenda. It is an anti-energy agenda, and it's one that ultimately makes consumers suffer in this country. It makes manufacturers suffer. And it's not even like this old, like, big oil versus the environment thing. Like plastics really are the backbone of industry. They've made infrastructure incredibly affordable. They have made just COVID. Just look at COVID alone. Whatever you think of pandemic response, it was plastics that really saved the day in COVID, because you had this ability to manufacture single-use products, which was needed in a situation like this. So, basically, I wanted to just set the stage that we are on top of this. We are following along with this, and we're going to continue to have coverage over the course of the week, because I want to make clear here that as much as they claim science is on their side and environmental policy is on their side, these things could not be further from the truth. And they really are waging what looks genuinely like an anti-industrial agenda. And we had yesterday on the show from the Vinyl Association, the president of that organization, Anya Curran, and she was saying, listen, we're working with them. We're trying to be stakeholders here. So anyway, we will follow that along over the course of the week. I wanted to kick back in time to something else in Ottawa. A couple of weeks back, I was there for the Canada Strong and Free Network Conference and sat down with my friend Jen Gerson, who has quickly become one of the most successful figures in independent media in this country as co-founder of The Line. Now, she's not, one of these like disrespectable, horrendous, evil, Haiti right-wingers like me, but she was invited and she was on a panel. It was rather spirited with Michael Geist and David Freeheit, who's goes by Viva Fry or Viva Frey. To be honest, I don't know how he pronounces it now that I think of it, but he goes by Viva on Rumble and on social media. And they had a spirited discussion about the future of media. Now, Jen is very critical of the government's heavy-handed approach here, but at the same time, she also doesn't go as far into the libertarian realm as David did, and as perhaps many of you do. So wanted to sit down and get her perspective on this. This is from the CSFN conference in Ottawa. Non-subsidized media, independent media, it is a relatively small community in Canada. One of the best in this space, though, is The Line, founded by Jen Gerson and my old talk radio colleague, Matt Gurney. Great to have Jen Gerson with us in person here. Jen, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You were speaking on a panel that actually it was one of the more engaging panels, because there was a fair bit of contrast about the internet regulations, and there are a great many of them from C11 to C18 and now C63. At its core, you had said something that I found quite interesting, which was that, yes, you're against a lot of what the government's doing, but you're also concerned about a media ecosystem in which there's only a particular type of media left. I mean, frankly, one in which True North fills that void. And I was wondering if you could just expand on that a bit.
Yeah, this goes back to my argument, and it's a very unpopular argument in this room, and it will definitely be an unpopular argument with your audience, is that I do think there's an important role for an organization like the CBC to play, especially when we're talking about a population. We don't have the same population density in the U.S. We don't have the same economies of scale that the U.S. has, and therefore it's a really, really hard place for private media organizations to cover extensively, particularly when we're talking about local news, right? I'm not talking about Calgary or Toronto. Those places are well served. What about Medicine Hat? What about Lethbridge? What about Moose Jaw? Places like that. These places have become news deserts, and I think it becomes really difficult not only to govern countries that don't have access to good quality journalistic media, but also how do we maintain a sense of national identity and a sense of national cohesion in a media environment where private media has essentially vacated this field. This is where I think that there could be a role for a radically reformed or radically rethought out CBC or something like it to be able to, by statute or by mandate, provide good quality, basic, objective journalism in, say, every town over 100,000 people in this country.
I think the counterpoint to that is that was supposed to be what CBC was doing, and they've had a fair bit of mission creep in the sense that they haven't wanted to do that. I mean, when CBC launched its online opinion section, it's like, can anyone say that opinions on the internet are in short supply, that we need a
dude, I'll go further. Why do we have a CBC Gem? Why do we have a CBC streaming service? Did you know that CBC actually is trying to duplicate Duolingo with an app to teach people French and English? I mean, these are things that are radically beyond what most of us would understand the CBC mandate to be. However, the answer to that question isn't necessarily to defund the CBC. The answer is a radical mandate review. And the other thing that I would do is I would take the CBC out of the Broadcasting Act, where it currently nestles and has a very unclear and fairly vague mandate, which permits that kind of mission creep. And I would create a CBC Act. I would essentially put the CBC in statute, and I would enshrine things like their journalistic standards of practice. I would enshrine a standard of journalism that I think most taxpayers could get behind, and I would enshrine things like let's say, for example, every town over 100,000 people needs a CBC reporter, for example. The other thing that I would do with the CBC, I mean, if I were in charge in God, then that's going to happen.
Well, if Polyev wins, we can put your resume to the top of the pile for taking over. Yeah.
I would also say everything that the CBC produces should be open source. So every news organization, left, right, center, whatever, should be able to take the CBC's written and visual content and audiovioval content.
Canadian press might not like that, but it would
whatever.
Let it be a public good.
But it's a public good. If we're going to fund it like a public good, we should treat the resources of that thing like a public good. I would have the CBC imagine itself more as a library, like a library of journalistic knowledge and resources. The other thing that I think people are not remembering as well is that the CBC is a huge store of archival information, digital and physical archives. This is the repertoire or the reservoir of a huge amount of Canadian culture and history, and I think that we need to treat it as such and put some serious investment into in maintaining those archives and those archive services for the purpose of maintaining a Canadian culture thing. The other thing I would do, and I would just say this, I would also have the CBC see itself as a training apparatus or a training role. So perhaps you go to the CBC if you want to start a podcast in Lethbridge. Well, maybe you can go to the CBC and get a workshop about how to do podcast editing. Maybe you can go to the CBC and rent out a room. Maybe you can go to the CBC and rent out your equipment, that kind of thing. So I could see them as being a real hub for being a support for creating an innovative media model in a country like Canada, where we have some unique sort of market-based challenges by virtue of our size and lack of population density.
To go back to the local aspect for a moment, one of the challenges with the True North is that, and the Line in particular, we're lean operations. Yeah. We can also find a coalition to support what we're doing nationally. It would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to do that at a local level.
It's a hard, the numbers are really hard because, how many people do you need to make a living? Well, you really need about a base of about 1,000 people who will pay for you. I mean, it's not huge. It's not unattainable.
It's the old 1,000 true fans
argument. It's the 1,000 true fans,
yes.
right? So, that's easy when you have, well, it's not easy, but even in a country of 40 million people, what are our fan bases? Our fan bases are maybe large enough to support our income and a small team around us. They're not large enough to support the 20, 30-person newsrooms of yore. And I think that's just a reality that mainstream media has got to get used to. But if we're talking about, well, how do we ensure that people in Sparwood have good access to local information? Are there going to be 1,000 paying people in Sparwood? Well, maybe for some people. They're really good, but if what you're producing is the local football team, the local basketball team, your local city council, your local court cases, those sorts of things, it's really hard to make the economy of scale work there. And that might be a reason or an argument for some kind of help in the form of maybe it's just the CBC is in that space and supporting any kind of local startups, but also serving that community in that space. I think the CBC also does need to get back into the mindset of its job isn't to be a top-down creator of culture and meaning for people. It's there to serve the people. It's a service that the people need to buy into to understand its value. If
you lost the audience in your CBC plan, I think you can get them back on this one, because you had also made a comment in your remarks on stage that was, I think, probably the most controversial thing you'd say to some people, which was that we need to get comfortable with the idea of things going out of business. And we need to get comfortable 100%. With this idea of collapse, because there is never going to be that reinvention without that death. And what we have now is this weird, indefinite life support model where we're keeping industries that don't want to reform aboard for what?
Well, that's the question. And also, I mean, the line has made a particular point of not accepting government subsidy in any form. Not only do we not accept government subsidy in any form, www.readtheline, please subscribe. Got to get that bitch in. Like and subscribe. But we think that's a bad business model. Not only does it compromise your independence and your integrity and the credibility that you have with an audience, but it's terrible. It's a terrible way to build a sustainable business model, because it means that the next time a government comes in and out of power, your money can get turned off like that. That's not a way to run a business. Now, I understand that to some degree there's always going to be some aspects of subsidy in a country like Canada. Okay, fine. I'm fine with the local journalism initiative that supports local reporters. I don't really have an issue so much with that. I do also understand that there's going to be some subsidies for organizations that are purely cultural. So maybe there's going to be some arts magazine subsidies, those sorts of things. Fine. I'm not too fussed about that. I think that's the table stakes of a country like Canada. There's nothing to be done about it. It's nothing I'm going to get too worked up over. But no, we can't. What we've done is we've moved into a model where basically every single private media outlet, with the exception of maybe you and me, are government subsidized. That's not sustainable. That's insane. Nope. That's completely insane. And the taps are, I think, when Pierre Poilievre becomes prime minister, and I think at this point it's very likely to happen, the taps are just going to get turned off on you. And then what are you going to do? You haven't reformed, you haven't sustained, you haven't built something viable for yourself. You're still bloated, you're still debt-ridden, and you've still lost your advertising monopoly. Now what? Right? There's no There's no future in that.
Yeah. Well, and it cements that path dependency, because now you can't take it away because, we've built our entire businesses around that.
Well, and also you've destroyed your brand models in the process, because now you've taken money from the government, so nobody trusts you. Right?
Yeah, very well said.
And if you want to see, if you believe that money doesn't sway coverage and how things are covered, look at the way that the media who are the recipients of, for example, C63's Google's money. Go look in the past and look at how they covered C63. It was almost
C18.
C18, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, C63 is the online harms one,
I'm talking about the Online News Act.
All the numbers blur together. It's okay.
That's the problem. I'm sorry. But go look at how they covered themselves in that.
Yeah.
There was very, very little coverage outside of the independent media. Organizations like mine, organizations like yours, and academics like Michael Geist. There was very little critical coverage of that. So you can see in real time how money affects the way people approach problems and coverage. And by the way, I don't think that that's even unique to government money or advertising money. The people who cut the check kind of get to set the rules. I mean, you and I, we're right now, the line is 100% reader funded. Everybody who supports us because they find value in our product. The risk of that kind of a model is audience capture, right? Like, how do you make sure that you're providing stuff that's true to yourself and demonstrates integrity for your own beliefs, and not just pander to your audience because that's what they're going to pay for, right? That's a risk. When you have an advertising-based model, you run the risk of being swayed by your advertisers. That's a risk you have to deal with. And when you're predominantly subsidized by government, the government in power is going to affect your ability to pay your rent. Of course, that's going to sway the way that you view news and the way that you're shifting your mindset. That is unavoidable, but the way to avoid that is to try and create as many different revenue streams as possible so that you can avoid too much dependence on one kind of revenue stream. And the other thing is to try and maintain your integrity as much as possible with a high diversity of revenue streams, but also, not making yourself solely dependent on one revenue stream like the government, right? I mean, that's just
which is also true of you, because even though you run the 100%. Line, you're publishing everywhere. I see you all the time, and I love it.
But there's no purity here, right? And there can't be, because in an environment where everybody takes government money, if I want to do any freelancing on the side, I guess I'm going to the CBC. I'm going to take a fee for going to the CBC, but I'm also going to take a fee if I go to write something for the Star or the Globe.
So you're respectable. You get invited to all these places. I don't.
Yeah, well, that's. I'm working on it. I mean, one of the funny things of the panel today is that I suddenly realized that I'm not the bomb thrower in the room anymore, and that was a real shift for me.
Viva Fry took that role on your
he
panel,
took that role, and I became the adult in the room, and I'm like, I got a new suit, but my God, like, I didn't think that this had happened. Like, I'm the old respectable lady now. Like, how did that?
He's more of a burn it down person than you are on this, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
And then Michael Geist was like the government defender for a moment,
which is hilarious, because Michael Geist is not
a
government defender in everything. I think David and I sort of disagreed on a couple of points, and that was one of them being there are aspects, for example, of the Online Harms Act that are probably good and worth preserving. There's a lot of problems with the Online Harms Act, and I mean, both Michael and I have written in depth and at length about what we think those problems are. I kind of disagreed with David. I think he's got a misapprehension of why mainstream media is in trouble. It's not for the reason that people like to think it is. Most people, especially conservatives, like to think that mainstream media is in trouble because mainstream media doesn't align with their viewpoints, and therefore they've lost audience. And
I think that's contributing, though. I think there is I think the trust. I don't think you can separate the trust deficit from the business issues.
Yes, there's a trust deficit and there's a decline deficit. But the primary, and I think that those are accelerating right now and have accelerated in the last 5 years. But if you want to go back 10, 15 years where the problems with media started, the problems with media started with the collapse of the ad monopolies. And you need to fundamentally understand that. And as the collapse, the money got sucked out of the industry became more and more beholden to a kind of ideological viewpoint, and that contributed to the trust deficit. They became more dependent on government money. That contributed to the trust deficit. But it doesn't start with the trust deficit. It starts with the collapse in the ad monopolies. And this is why you see the same issues affecting mainstream media and legacy media, regardless of whether or not they're left or right. Because the reason why these organizations traditionally were able to print money is because they had an absolute ironclad monopoly on the ad market, and particularly on classifieds. The second newspapers lost classifieds, they were in deep shit.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right?
All right. Well, that's the first time that word has ever been uttered on True North. So
Sorry.
that's okay.
Oh, wow. Really?
Well, because we have the clean tag on Apple Podcasts that we forever lose. So
I'm so sorry.
She has gone more irreverent than me, which is, I think, a great testament to the work at the line. So, Jen Gerson, I love the line. I read the line. You should as well. But it's great to talk to you in person.
You too. Thanks.
Always love connecting with Jen Gerson. And as I said about that conference, it was great to connect with people in person that I usually see in little Zoom boxes. I don't know why I needed to illustrate a Zoom box like the old in charades. Anyway, well, I wanted to pivot from that to a discussion we had yesterday on the program about the normalization of anti-Semitism. And I've always been clear to point out since October 7th, this is not a new issue. It is one that I think has a new zeal, and one that people have a newfound brazenness. But a lot of what's happened in the last 6 months has merely been a ramping up of existing sentiments, existing groups, and really a sense that no one feels they need to hide their, what is in many cases, venomous hatred of Jews and the Jewish state. But it's not just about Israel. It's not just about Zionism. It is about Jewish people. And this has become abundantly clear in the clip that we played yesterday from Ottawa of them literally defending October 7th and those attacks. And it's been clear in a lot of the rhetoric that talks about resistance, as though all of what's happened is not just bloodthirst and a murder, but is in fact just an act of political resistance. Now, that comment that was made on the weekend comments, plural, in Ottawa about October 7th. I wanted to share this clip of Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland being asked to condemn it.
Over the weekend, protesters in Ottawa were heard chanting, among other things, "Long live October 7th," and October 7th is proof that we are almost free. Is this hate speech?
I wasn't in Ottawa over the weekend, and I'm not aware of those specific reports, and so it would be just wrong of me to comment on something that I am not specifically aware of. What I will say is today is a time in Canada when anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are on the rise. When we have there are a lot of Canadians who are not feeling safe.
Oh, I wasn't in Ottawa then. Oh, I was washing my hair that day. Oh, I must have missed it. I mean, at that point, if I was the journalist, and I don't know the format of the press conference, it would have been, well, I have it on my phone here. Why don't you watch it for yourself? But that wasn't even necessary. The journalist quoted it. Why could Chrystia Freeland not just in that moment say, well, based on what you've just said, I think this? But she didn't, because this government's default position is cowardice. They only defend the most extreme examples, and even then never right away, because they have to think about how it's going to reflect in their polling numbers. This is what Chrystia Freeland wrote on X after the fact. She writes in response here, I need it up on the screen before I can, there we go. Having seen video from this weekend, I can only express shock and disgust at the anti-Semitism and glorification of terrorism that occurred on Parliament Hill. This hate speech has no place in Canada, none. I guess by that time, 5:29, the focus groups had come back and she could safely condemn what had happened. It's difficult to not get angry about this, and I also don't think people, especially members of Canada's Jewish community, should have to hide this. My friend Dahlia Kurtz, I actually met in Israel for the first time in person. She and I were colleagues for the same radio company some years ago, and we had the chance to go and travel Israel as part of a delegation of Canadian journalists and have been friends ever since. Dahlia was working on a book about something that had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with Israel, but was pushed off of that project onto another one in the wake of October 7th. That book is called Dear Zionist, You Are Not Alone, just came out in the last few days, and Dahlia joins me on the line now. Dahlia, wonderful to talk to you again. Thank you so much for coming today.
What's the background? What is happening here?
I thought you did that.
I do not. None. No background. That was...
There we go. We're off to a great start.
It was the laser from Zion. They redirected it in the inappropriate way. They were supposed to use those lasers to send them... I'm not allowed to say. Andrew, I'm so happy to be on your show.
Well, it's good to have you here. Let's start on that comment by Chrystia Freeland, because you have always been, and even just now, we're talking about a serious topic, but you've always been just this ray of sunshine in Canadian media. But back when you did your former show, I know you always used to highlight good news stories and positive things. I've seen from you a lot more of an edge since October 7th, and I don't fault you for that, but I was wondering if you could speak about how what's happened has really pushed the way that you are using your voice.
Well, one, when you're an independent, things change. People don't have to tell you to not be as Jewish. You could be Jewish, but not a Jew. Ish part is okay. But the other part of it is October 7th, I just put everything aside. I dropped everything that I was doing because I immediately saw where this was going and what this was going to become. And I immediately realized I'm going to be that person that I always thought I would be if something like this happens again. And let me tell you, anybody who is a child of the Holocaust, a grandchild of the Holocaust, that's what you're going to think. It's going to be in the back of your brain forever. To hear Chrystia Freeland speak the way that she does, I mean, the entire thing was absolutely laughable. So all I can do is I wrote an entire joke about it online. But the sad part is it was funny, but it was only funny because it's true. So it's actually entirely pathetic. I wasn't in Ottawa. I had heard what had happened. You don't need to be in Ottawa. She could have asked any one of the 100+ people in that room, like you said, to just play a little clip of the audio there. Which she, of course, let's all be clear, she already heard that audio. There's no way that she never did. And then she has to plop in there somewhere. Let me just say, Islamophobia is on the rise in Canada, which she forgot to mention in that whole little spiel is about her sweet grandfather, who, interesting connection when, he is one of the Nazi newspapers that recruits who did we end up seeing in our parliament? It was the same type of person. There's a lot of direct lines here. So, it's not her action that I'm looking at, it's her inaction. And the inaction is abundantly clear. There was a mosque that had a break-in entry. It was an attempted break-in entry in Winnipeg a couple of weeks back. Justin Trudeau drops everything. Carbon emissions be damned. And he gets himself to Winnipeg. You could see this lock was sort of broken, and he's hand on heart, nobody should be scared of a place they worship in. What about the 100 churches that have gone up in flames? What about the Jews 400,000 of us with numbers dwindling as we're moving away, making Aliyah more and more? What about that? What does that mean to him? And it's come to a point where the way I feel about it is everybody keeps saying lead. And I mean, just yesterday, I shared some investigative journalism that I've done where I looked at the person who had been campaigning for the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow. And this person, Mosen Patel, I have a video in this tweet where you can see him demanding that we kill Israel, the very person who has been campaigning with Olivia Chow. So you know what? I think it is absolutely ridiculous that we even ask the leaders to do better. There's nothing to do better because, one, they're leaders with air quotes, and two, they've already failed us. So we see what they're capable of and we see what they're not capable of. So the leaders have failed us. We will not fail us. And I feel that it's up to me. It's up to people who have a voice. It's up to anybody who will speak up and not be afraid. Andrew, it boggles my mind that people call me outspoken. Why? Because I say, don't kill the Jews. Crazy talk.
You said something a few moments ago I wanted to revisit, because you said it, I think, almost incidentally, but you had said the type of person, you wanted to be the type of person you thought you would be if something like this happened again. And I found that word again quite jarring, because you and I know that terrorism in Israel is not sadly uncommon. I mean, when you and I were there in 2015, there had been a spate of knife stabbings on the street, and Israelis have a much higher than normal tolerance level for, these sorts of things there. It takes a lot for something to rise to front page news in Israel that elsewhere in the world would be. But when you say never again, you're putting October 7th, as I understand it, in the same category as the Holocaust, are you not?
100%. And that's not even coming from my mouth directly. That's coming from every hostage who's been released. They have said that was a Holocaust. It's a Holocaust. And so I'm going to take from the people who were there, I'm going to take from the feeling that it gave me. And that is absolutely a Holocaust. I shared a picture the other day. I was looking at Columbia University and all of the students there who were blocking the Jews from going in. And I juxtaposed that against a picture I saw from 1938 in Vienna, where the students were blocking the Jewish students from entering. And I thought, I'm going to find obviously the similarities in this. But what really struck me were not the similarities. It was the dark differences. It was the fact that now, in 2024, where it looked worse because you saw more students, population has grown, this or that, the worst part about it is that these students who are now joining in this Kristallnacht, as it was described by the Jewish students at Columbia, they've had the opportunity to see history. They've had the opportunity to learn from history, and they have chosen the side of be less than human from history. So that choice unto itself makes this much worse than what we experienced before. And to see the way that Canada has reacted, to see what's happening in the US, to see all of these governments fail us, I can completely understand how you create bonds, and you create bonds with people. It's the entire bond of Am Yisrael Chai. It's the bond of being one, because you know that not everybody is going to have your back. So if they don't have it, you will have it. But at the same time, there are a bunch of people who are suffering, and not everybody has the tools to cope with this. And since October 7th, I've been receiving messages because I've been very bold, and I have been blacklisted up the wazoo, Andrew. Death threats, blacklisted. My entire mission has just gone to, okay, fine, I'm just going to pour myself into this. You can't pay rent with pouring yourself into something. I'll be clear about that. But I will pour myself into this. And if people are sending me messages from around the world saying that I'm doing something that's helping them, well, that's absolutely fantastic. I need to do more of this. So I decided to write this book, Dear Zionist, You Are Not Alone, 18 Letters of Hope and Light. And the whole idea of it, first of all, is that this is not about Jews. It's about Jews and our non-Jew supporters. The quickest Zionist test anybody could take, and most people don't even realize that they're a Zionist, but the quickest Zionist test anybody could take is, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And if you say yes, mazel tov, you're a Zionist. And I got a message from one of the readers yesterday, and she said to me, I finished reading the book, and, this part about you are not alone, when we're getting to that, I know that you meant it for Jewish people, but I have to say, it really made me feel not alone. I didn't mean it for Jewish people. I meant it for people. I meant it for anybody who has a shred of humanity in them, because I can guarantee you, you can be any religion, any color, any heritage, any ethnicity, and this book is going to touch you in some way. Just be careful who you sit next to on an airplane, because one of the readers was crying next to somebody who did not quite know how to comfort them through this.
Let me ask you about the hopefulness of it, because one of the challenges in a time like this is that we don't yet see an end in sight. I mean, if anything, the public sympathy for Israel from people that might not identify as Zionists was at a high point on October 7th, October 8th, and I think it's been in decline ever since then. And I think, people often very dishonestly conflate, I have this little criticism with Benjamin Netanyahu. They use that to sort of shield. No, you actually have a deep hatred of the Jewish people. You're just, trying
You're
to
attacking a synagogue in Toronto, and Benjamin Netanyahu's in his war cabinet.
Yeah,
yes.
he doesn't even know what Yonge Street is, and you're out there and you're in Forest Hill and all of that. But where do you see this going? Because with any sort of boiling crisis like this, the fear is that it has to get worse before it gets better. But at this point, it is worse. I mean, we're seeing this. We're seeing open calls for violence on the street. And at this point, people are faced with two options. They can either do something about it, or they can literally do the Chrystia Freeland thing, do the ostrich thing, stick your head in the sand and say, oh, I wasn't in Ottawa. Like at that point, it's you can't make it more apparent than these people already have.
The hiding thing isn't hiding, it's aiding and abetting. That's all it is. I don't see any other way around it. I think that things, especially this past weekend, I saw the surge, and I see the surge of violence that's going to get worse. Somebody in person. I mean, Andrew, I get death threats. I get people have measured nooses for my neck. I've had so many horrid things said to me online. But there was a person just near where I live who saw me, gave me a dirty look, and called me a Nazi. Quick to run, mind you, because that's what they do.
I love how defending Jews has become Nazism in 2024. I mean, this shows how devoid of historic knowledge and just, basic fundamental reason these people are.
And I took the word Zionist also for the book because, one, its meaning is powerful and true, and two, they're trying to take the word Zionist away from us. This has been an ongoing campaign, and this is where the Jewish people have failed themselves in fighting something like this, which we've known for many, many years has been coming. There has been an ongoing Palestinian campaign that is very centralized, and everybody has their documents, and everybody has their way of speaking, and there's a very clear path, and it is being executed exceptionally well. It is a very well-oiled machine. Meanwhile, you have so many different Jewish organizations, each trying their own thing, not necessarily working together, and it's just ending up being a lot of noise instead of cohesiveness. So this entire idea of the war that is not in the field, but the war that is in the real world, it needs to change the way that it is fought. And for me, I look at that in a couple of folds. One, you need to strengthen your people. And by my people, I'm not referring to Jewish people. I'm referring to Jewish people and our non-Jewish supporters. And I think that the strength that is found in this book from the people who have been at the most bitter points of darkness in their lives, the things that have happened to them, a few of them are Holocaust survivors. One is a war hero. Another was on his way to terrorist camp to become a terrorist, and then everything changed for him. So when you look at what these people have been through, and also a very special story about my father, because he sacrificed everything to change Canada so that people could get jobs regardless of religion, which ended up hurting him much more later on. But when you look at the hardships, the tragedies, how are they going to get out of this, and these true stories, and not only how they made it through, but how they made it through to become exceptional successes, who thrived beyond measure. And I will say, if you've ever seen Inglourious Bastards, the last person that I highlight as a Holocaust survivor in this book, Dr. Morris Schnitzer, it will give you a little bit of that cathartic kick that you could get. I'm not going to give anything away there, but really the whole point of this is, I think that's one side of the battle, is helping people, empowering people, Jews and our non-Jewish supporters. And that is where this book comes from. And I have greater plans for a bigger series. I had to get this out as quick as possible. My second edition is going to be longer in audiobook, in paperback, and then this whole Dear Zionist is going to move on towards other series as well. But first, we have to work on strengthening people. And the other side is we have to become more cohesive. We have to create more of a singular vision in how we're going to tackle this, the same way that the PR on the other side has been working it for years. And that requires a lot of catching up. But we've also learned from Israelis and Jewish people, we can be very innovative, especially when our lives are at risk.
Yeah, very much so. And I've always been, I've always tremendously admired the resilience of Israelis, but you have to extend that to Jewish people now. And, people that go around the world in this day and age and wear a yarmulke, walk into a synagogue, wear a Star of David. I mean, they're doing that knowing full well what that attracts. And there you go. You got the I don't know, it's a super Jew, Superman. I don't know. It's a little bit of both there.
Super
I
Jew.
love it. Let's Sean, throw that book cover up there. The book from Dahlia Kurtz called Dear Zionist, You Are Not Alone. You can get that over on her website, dahliakurtz.com. Great to talk to you, Dahlia. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Andrew, can I just mention quickly?
Of course.
You bought this book from me. I didn't ask for this conversation. I'm happy I'm here. Usually you send media a book and, that's just how it is. You didn't even ask me for a copy like everybody else. You paid, sir.
Worth every penny. But I will say, when I worked in daily radio, I used to, you probably did as well in Winnipeg, I'd get from publishers, like it got to the point where it was almost like, like the letters in Harry Potter where they just keep coming, like all these books, like books would just show up and I've never asked for them or ordered them. And then once I wrote a book for the first time, I was like, no, I can't afford to just give everyone books. And now I always support my friends by buying the books. So
I want to know from the book at the end, you tell me your favorite quote. No pressure to read it.
Okay, I'll do. Yeah, it's always, you pick one from the middle so that everyone knows you read it and didn't just read the next few pages. But I will read it from cover to cover. Dahlia, thank you so much.
Thank you. Shalom.
All right. We'll get you back on soon. That is it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. This is the Andrew Lawton Show. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.